So I've had quite a few comments and email exchanges about cheap, low-power systems to run Plan 9 or 9Front on. Plan 9 running on a single computer is kind of unique, but not terribly interesting. Where it really shines and where you get those kind of aha moments is networking Plan 9 systems together. But dedicating the space and the power bill to have full-size computers is not for everyone. I recently came across this thing, which goes for about $100. It's the Thin T T4 Pro. Seen from what I could tell, it comes from some company called Beelink. Measures about 4 inches on the side, or about 10.5 centimeters. It's about 3¼ inches tall, or about 2 centimeters. Inside is a dual-core Celeron. So this is just regular Intel stuff. 4 gigs of RAM, 64 gigs of flash storage. It's eMMC, so not any kind of high-performance SSD stuff. So on the front here, you got a power button, headphone jack, and 2 USB ports. On the side here is another USB port. This side's empty except for the grill. On the back, there's a barrel jack, another USB port, 2 HDMI ports, and a Ethernet port. And inside of it is a Intel Wi-Fi chip. So it comes with a wall wart. This runs at 12 volts, 2 amps, so it's a max of 24 watts. I have seen some online that seem to have like HDMI and a display port as an option. Also, there's some little screws on the bottom, and some of these will come with a mounting kit, so you can like bolt the thing on the back of a monitor. Mine did not come with it, so it's just the bare little system. The grills, there is a fan inside, but it's fairly quiet. You really kind of have to put your ear right up to it to be hearing it spinning. All right, here it is booting up. The little color bars are my audio capture. So pressing F7 will get into the boot menu. Delete and escape, get into the BIOS settings. This thing comes with an activated copy of Windows 10 already installed on it. And surprisingly, there's like no bloatware. It's just a bare bones Windows 10 install. So for $100, a basic Windows box that can do basic online stuff isn't too bad of a deal. But what I want to do is run 9Front. So I already installed it on this thumb drive here, and I'll go ahead and boot that up. Doing the install wasn't too hard. It was just, put an empty thumb drive in one slot and the 9Front install drive in another. Like I've already done a video where I sort of showed that. And so here it is booting up. So once it gets going here, the resolution will be fixed. So this thing has a Wi-Fi card in it, and it's one that's compatible with the latest 9Front release. I haven't done any videos on Wi-Fi on 9Front yet, so I'll go ahead and walk through some of the setup and the basics of that. So the first time you boot 9Front, there will be a message somewhere in here about it not finding a firmware. In this case, it did find it because I've already fixed that problem. But it'll say like it can't find this file, and you'll want to write down the name of that because you'll need to find it later. So by default, the kernel won't have the firmware in it. So I'm going to go ahead and just let it run here. There it goes. So now it should be a little bit more readable. And it has to go through this little thing here. It's something having to do with testing for mice and keyboards. Anyway, what you have to do though is you have to get the firmware. The 9Front website has instructions on fetching that from OpenBSD, and they package up a bunch of firmware files into a zip file. So I fetched that with another computer, put that one file that I needed onto a thumb drive, moved it over to here, and then copied it. And the place it needs to go to is in lib firmware. And you can see I have the firmware file I needed for this particular Wi-Fi card is in there. So once you have the firmware file installed, the next thing you need to do is recompile the kernel. So that means going to sys source 9 PC64, since this is a 64-bit Intel system. I still have a mess in here from last time I did it. Oops. There we go. And part of what the kernel will do is, you've probably seen this from like when I've worked on little ARM or MIPS boards. Even with a system with no hard drive and no networking, I can still access the shell and run commands. And that's because when you compile a kernel, included is a small file system with some basic commands and some other stuff in there. That's called a packfs. And one of the places it pulls files from is that lib firmware's directory. So it finds if there's anything in there, it'll get copied onto the packfs included with the kernel, and that stuff can be read at boot. So you'll run make install, and this will compile the kernel. And you've probably seen me compile kernels on other systems. They're much quicker. So this is a dual core Celeron. Its base clock speed's like 1.1 gigahertz or something like that. It turbos up to 2. Most of my other systems are like quad core at 3 point something. So yeah, this is somewhere probably in Raspberry Pi territory as far as speed goes. Maybe a little slower. Actually, part of why it's slower, especially in this part here, is that it's writing to the thumb drive because that's its storage. But even on when you're using Windows, the flash storage inside is not like much different from a thumb drive. So this isn't like an SSD where you have cache that'll speed up writing files to storage. Anyway, so when it finishes compiling your kernel here, it's going to move a copy of it to /AMD64. And then all you have to do is use 9FS 9FAT to get access to your FAT file system where all your boot stuff is stored. So you can see I already have these over there. And then you just sort of, copy AMD 64, 9PC 64, oops, to the 9FAT. But yeah, I've already done that on here. So it already has the Wi-Fi drivers installed and working. Oh, there's actually one more little thing that might come in handy. I'll have to remount 9FAT. The way this thing's set up, by default, it will put the wired Ethernet as Ethernet 0 and the Wi-Fi as Ethernet 1. If you want to use the little networking meter thing here in stats, stats is hard-coded. That's only going to read either 0. So if you want your Wi-Fi to use ether 0, you can put this little sort of command in. You can also put in some other stuff like an access point to automatically connect to, and you could even put your password in here, but keep in mind that this file is just stored as plain text on a a FAT partition, so it's pretty easy to access. So you can just go ahead and change to net ether 0. And even without connecting to an access point, you can read if stats. and it will report back on any kind of access points or anything it sees. So if you want to connect to one, I'll hook up to the access point inside my grid here. So do aux WPA. So flag S, and you can specify the access point to connect to. The P flag will prompt for a password. If you want, you can go ahead and put your passwords into factotum, and then it will recognize, a password associated with a given access point and automatically put it in for you. So that's an option too. And then you have to put in the specific Wi-Fi device you want to use. So it's Ether0 in this case. So there it is. It's asking me for my password. All right. So I should be able to let's turn on the scroll. So yeah, now it's going to say that I'm associated with a given access point. But the next thing I have to do is actually get a an IP address and all that. So you can see there's some little activity now on the Ethernet thing on stats. So that's just your usual IP config. Doing ether on net Ether0. And if that worked, I should be able to ping out now. And there it is. So far I've noticed that my performance on this isn't very good. It does work. It is a little slow. I'm not sure if that's 9Front's driver, some sort of crappy antennas installed inside this little box, or I also live in a very crowded area. I don't use Wi-Fi a lot. Most of my stuff's wired because Wi-Fi around here is fairly crowded. You can see this is all just the 2.4 gigahertz, and also 9Front only has 2.4 gigahertz drivers currently. So a lot of times when I do have stuff in my house with Wi-Fi, I try to use 5 gigahertz for that reason. So yeah, this is works pretty well otherwise. Let's actually try doing something. Let's turn Mothra on. Let's go to try Wikipedia. Oop, bad URL, huh? Probably wants an S. Not com, it's an org. Oh, there we go. It's fetching it now. And there we go. I speak English. Yeah, let's see something random. So yeah, the Wi-Fi does work. I can access stuff. I can ping, get on the websites. But anyway, this is just sort of a demonstration of running this thing like you're running, some of the the standalone 9Front systems I demonstrated, a while back. So now let's try using this as a terminal on my 9Front grid. All right, for this one, I'm still just going to boot off that thumb drive like before. But instead of using the storage on the thumb drive, I'm going to tell it to connect to my my grid's file server. I'm also going to be using the wired Ethernet this time because it does perform quite a bit better. All right, so rather than use the default option of booting off the storage, I'm going to use TLS and tell it Ethernet Ether1 for the wired Ethernet. And I'll use a user that's on my grid. Oh, there we go. All right, wants to confirm, so it's already talking to the auth server now. So that's the user. Put in my user's password, and here it goes. So this is an interesting thing. It does see that there's a USB audio device hooked in there, but can't attach to it for some reason. I'll probably get to that at the end of the video as far as kind of weird quirks on this thing I found so far. But surprisingly, most of this stuff, most of it just works. So here we go. I already have an NDB entry set up for this computer, so it has a name on my network. So the response on here is quite a bit better. Actually, I can use NetSurf because I installed that for a demonstration once. So go ahead and show off that running. But yeah, so for a a terminal on a grid, this is actually a pretty slick little box here. I can plug thumb drives into it and read stuff off of it. Should actually see the thumb drive that's already in there. Yep. Does some basic stuff, runs okay. So you can see now that it's not showing any network activity on here because I'm using Ether 1 instead of Ether 0. What else? There's not much to it, really. It will behave sort of like a terminal here. I wouldn't use this thing for a CPU server, definitely not a file server. So it's only 64 gigs on it, and it's basically the equivalent of a built-in like USB drive. The MMC drives are not very durable, and they're not very fast. Maybe a CPU server in the sense that you could have it as something that you hook USB devices to and read. It's a very sort of small, unobtrusive device, so it could be used as a CPU server, but really it's just a nice little terminal. I'm using a like 800 by 600 resolution here because it sort of plays nice with the with my little cheap video capture device. But in Windows, the dual HDMI does work. It'll run dual screens at full HD, so it works pretty well. So overall, not bad for $100. Granted, my standards for computers are pretty low. My first computer was a Commodore 64. The first time I got on the internet was with the original Mosaic browser on a 486. And the first time I ran dual Celerons was on an 8-bit BP6 motherboard back in the year 2000. For you specifically with 9Front, the only thing I noticed is that the only thing that really didn't work was the audio. It saw a USB audio device, and it also saw something with an audio in its name in the PCI bus. You can see here in Windows, there's some sort of HDMI to USB display audio thing, so it might do audio over HDMI. Let's see what else. Yeah, Intel display audio, so that might work with some tweaks, but just out of the box with the default install, no. All the networking worked. Let's see, where's that here? So yeah, that was the Intel 7265 and this Realtek gigabit Ethernet. I did not check to see if 9Front could read or write the internal flash, mostly because I decided I wanted to keep Windows on here because it's kind of handy having something that has Windows. I don't have a whole lot of Windows computers in my house. Sometimes that does come in handy, especially one that, you know, there's not even the little watermark saying that isn't paid for. It's a full version of Windows. But yeah, other than that, it you know, especially for Wi-Fi, that's always been a problem with 9Front. Wi-Fi drivers are really difficult to write, and usually, if you ask around, they'll tell you, rather than write a driver, just to go buy something with Intel Wi-Fi, and this little device happens to include it for $100, sometimes less if you poke around. So, hope that was helpful for anyone looking for a cheap Intel machine with Wi-Fi to run 9Front on. And as usual, have fun.